Hi, happy Friday. And on Friday, I do my fact-checking videos. Now, last week, I did a fact-checking video for another channel. It's called Actual Justice Warrior. Sean over there was nice enough to allow me to share a video with his audience, which is super because his audience is much bigger than mine. And because of that, a couple hundred of you signed up and subscribed to my channel. So I do appreciate that. Thank you for checking out my stuff and subscribing. It means so much to me. I do want to say for my audience, if you haven't checked out Sean's channel, I'll leave a link in the description below. He doesn't need my help, but if you like my videos, you'll probably like his as well. I think he makes great content, so be sure to check that out. Now, after the little coffee cup introduction, you will see the video that I made last week. It's a little bit long, but in it, I am fact-checking CNN and the Young Turks, and I think you'll get a kick out of it, so enjoy the video. Hi, thanks for watching. Today is Friday, and on my channel, that's Fact Check Friday, where normally I will look at some fact checkers and decide if they've done a good job or not about checking the facts. But today, I'm going to fact check the Young Turks and their reporting on a CNN story and whether or not we can really rely on what they're saying. So this morning, I went to the Young Turks YouTube channel, and the first video that came up was Don Lemon destroys domestic terrorism myths. This is a longer version of another video that they put out yesterday. Right wing loses their minds over Don Lemon. So this should be good. Let's check it out.
So Don Lemon said something on TV the other day that enraged the right wing. Surprise, surprise. Okay, they're easily triggered. So we're going to show you what Don Lemon said, and then we're going to show you that it is true, and then we're going to try to find a safe space for conservatives who were triggered by it. So let's watch.
I keep trying to point out to people not to demonize any one group or any one ethnicity, but we keep thinking that the biggest terror threat is something else. Some people who are marching, towards the border like it's imminent. So we have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right. And we have to start doing something about them. There is no travel ban on them. There is no ban on, they have the Muslim ban. There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that?
Okay, so that is factually correct, and hence the right wing is losing their mind. See, when they attack other races, they find that to be perfectly normal. When you just simply point out facts about their race, they flip out. Okay, so we're gonna get to their outrage in a second. So first, let me show you the numbers. So is extremism on the rise in the past 15 years? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. As you can see in this graphic, it is significantly on the rise. Oh, look at that. It really takes a big jump around 2015. I wonder who came onto the national stage around then, but that's okay. That's, just a sense of where the trend is going. The more important part is, well, is it really right-wing extremists who happen to be white? Or is it the Muslims, the Latinos, the blacks? There's prone to violence, okay? I mean, there's scary caravans coming. That is what Don Lemon was talking about, right? So
Cenk has a source, and this is the source that we're going to check. It's from a Quartz article, and this is the graph that he put on the screen. Now, it's important to note that he chose this source, right? He could have chosen any source, but this is the one that he chose. So let's take a look at it. This is an article on Quartz. U.S. terror attacks are increasingly motivated by right-wing views. Now, the important thing when you're checking a source is you need to find out about the source. What do you know about this source? What is Quartz? Well, Quartz is a news website, and they don't really have any writers. They have people that write for them and submit stories, and that's what happened here. This story was written by Luis Romero, and you're like, oh, from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or which big organization does he write for? He doesn't. He's a kid in Brazil. Now, he studied journalism, but he doesn't work for any big media company. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not a good source or not, but it's important to know that the source of this article is some kid in Brazil. My guess is that Luis Romero made a little bit less than $100 writing this article for Quartz. And for that, this is who the Young Turks is quoting, right? This is the source, okay, that they're quoting. This is the big important source. And it is interesting, the chart here of terror incidents in the U.S. over the past 15 years. Well, why did they choose 15 years? Because if they chose 20 years, you would see that 20 years ago, the rates were actually higher than they are today. But that doesn't help the narrative, right? So he chose a group of years that proved his point. Now, he's using the analysis from the Global Terrorism Database. This is interesting because he has this, this graph here. And when you click on the graph, it goes to a chart company called the Atlas. And you can look at the source material for these numbers. And the interesting thing is, if there are 60 acts of terrorism, you would think that there might be a list of what those 60 acts of terrorism are. No. No. What this researcher did is he went to the Global Terrorism Database and just decided for himself which were right-wing, which were left-wing, which were Muslim extremist. And he just tallied them up himself. Well, you can go to the Global Terrorism Database and look for yourself at what is being reported. So I put in the year 2017. This is the last year that they have data for. And I live here in Portland, Oregon. So I said, well, what is the terrorism in Portland, Oregon? That should give me a handle on what's being reported. Well, they have one incident. It was an anti-Muslim extremist suspected. And this is an incident that everybody in Portland knows. But there was a guy, he was a crazy guy, and he was yelling at some ladies on the light rail. And one had a hijab, and some other people stepped in to defend them, and he knifed them, and he killed 2 people, and it was tragic. Now, in this, they're listing him as being a right-wing extremist. And perhaps he was a right-wing extremist, perhaps. A lot of people that knew this crazy guy around town knew him to be an anti-religious extremist. He was an atheist. He was against Christians, against Jews, against Muslims. I don't know that that necessarily makes you right-wing. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I do know he was a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and he hated Trump and Hillary Clinton. But maybe that makes you right-wing, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But it's interesting that this is listed as terrorism, which was a crazy person, right? A crazy person. You know these people out in public. They're crazy. They yell at people. They're always confrontational with people. This guy was well known for just being a nut. But they've decided that this is terrorism. Okay. It's important to have a definition of terrorism. So just a basic definition of terrorism: the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. And they have decided that this killing was terrorist. Could be. It could be. But they didn't list anything else that was terrorist. And here's an example of something that was not listed as an incident of terrorism.
You then, Kristen. Well, threats of violence raining down on a Portland parade this weekend, and as a result, the 82nd Avenue Roses Parade has been canceled.
East Portland business leaders tell us they actually can't guarantee everyone's safety at what is traditionally the first Rose Parade of the season. Our Lisa Balick is following this story and joins us now live from City Hall. You got a tip about this, didn't you, Lisa?
Yeah, this afternoon. And after 10 years of this big parade that celebrates people who live and work in East Portland, threats of violence over politics will now cancel it for those young and old.
For more than a decade, families have lined the streets along Southeast 82nd near Eastport Plaza to wave and cheer their neighbors, from homeowners to business owners and their kids who march in the local parade. But now, 4 days before that parade, threats of violence have washed it away.
I'm disgusted. And some of these people Who issued the threat, we think, are some of the people that come to City Hall and disrupt our meetings.
The online war of words started with the Oregon Republican Party entering a float in the parade. President Trump opponents started calling it a fascist float with white supremacists.
That happened in Portland as well in the same year. It was a big parade. The Republican Party was going to have a float in the parade, like in all parades, they have different floats. And some people decided that they didn't want that, and they sent threats to the Republican Party saying that they had 200 people, the cops couldn't stop them, and they were going to take care of them at the parade. And because the safety couldn't be insured for the people at the parade, they canceled it. To me, that's an act of terrorism. I think that's fair to say. It's an act of terrorism. But that's not listed in the terrorism database. Interesting. Now, depending on your political leanings, you may or may not think that Breitbart is a good source, but they have a rap sheet, 632 acts of media-approved violence and harassment against Trump supporters. And a lot of those were really violent. Those aren't listed in the terrorism database. The huge protests at Berkeley that went up in flames, not in the database as terrorism. Here in Portland, we had protests that turned into a riot, and there was over $1 million in property damage. That did not make this database. But what did make the database was a bus that had Jewish iconography on it in New York City. So that was an act of terrorism. But $1 million in damage to local car dealerships and things like that, that was not terrorism, according to this source. I'm not sure what I think of this source, but let's see what else Cenk has to say.
But let's note that about 3/4 of the violence done by extremists and the murders done by extremists in this country over the last decade are by white right-wingers. That's a fact. If you want to cry about that fact, that's up to you. Okay, but that is a fact.
So he says that's a fact. And that's a fact based on the information that he has. But the information that he has, it's pretty clear, is incomplete. Now, here's the thing. It may be true. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this. But I know that the source that he is citing is not listing everything. Now, Cenk just goes through and babbles on and on and on here. I'm going to skip over it. You can go watch the video if you're so interested. There's a lot of causes of violence, terrorism, and extremism in this country. And it's not all right-wingers. This isn't true. But Cenk just yells it out as if it's a fact. Because if you raise your voice, apparently, that means you're telling the truth. Okay, so that's a really long video that Cenk did where he blathers on and on and on, trying to make his point that the extremism, the terrorism in this country is right-wing white men. And the evidence that he uses for this is this article on Quartz written by a kid from Brazil. And the chart was from a company called The Atlas, where anyone can enter things online and make a chart. And then it can get picked up and used in the news. So here's a hint. When you're fact-checking, you need to check who the source is and decide whether or not you think that that's a good source. If you think that an online chart that some kid in Brazil put up is good enough for you, well, then go with it. It was good enough for Cenk. It was good enough for Don Lemon. It's not really good enough for me. I found a chart that was published on the Atlas. I think it's pretty fun. I want to tell you about this one. The chart is entitled News Professionals. Now, I'm not sure who they're talking about. It only lists 3 people. There's Tom, some guy named Don, and another news professional named Cenk. Okay? And in this chart, we have height and length. Now, I'm not sure what the length means, but height, obviously, is how tall the person is. Tom, apparently, is 6 foot tall, 72 inches. And his length is 9 inches. Again, I'm not sure what that means, but okay. Don is also 72 inches tall. I didn't know Don Lemon was that tall. And he happens to be 5 inches long. Again, don't know what that means. And Cenk, 69 inches tall, so he's only 5'9", and 4 inches in length. Now, I'm not sure what the length means, but apparently Tom is as long as both Don plus Cenk combined. That's all I need for a source, because some guy put it online and made a chart and published it online. So that's good enough for me. If it's good enough for me, it should be good enough for Don and Cenk, whoever those guys are. If you like this kind of video, check out my channel. It's called Coffee and Nuance. Link will be in the description or something. So what do you think? Do you think I checked all the facts? They're all legit, right? Let me know in the comments. Peace. Help me reach my goal of 1 million of 2,000 subscribers by clicking the like button and subscribing. Thanks.